Hello, everyone. Welcome to the second virtual conference on Korean Studies, organized by the International Program of Korean and East Asian Studies of the University of Costa Rica. This is Filippo Costantini, the coordinator of the program. Today, I'm honored to have two important international guests that will talk about a topic that I'm sure will be of great interest to our students. First of all, our main guest is Professor CedarBough Saeji, who present the conference honoring the ancestor or commodification, discussing traditional culture in a K-pop world. And we are also pleased to have Dr. Nayelli López, who will help us to deepen the topic with her comments. Before introducing Professor Saeji, I remind you that you can leave your comments and questions in English or in Spanish, we'll translate for you, in the YouTube channel of the INIF. CedarBough Saeji, she's an assistant professor of Korean and East Asian Studies at Pusan National University, Department of Global and International Studies. Previously at Indiana University, University of British Columbia, Korean University, and Hankook University of Foreign Studies. She has a PhD in culture and performance from the University of California. She co-edited of the volume Invented Tradition in North and South Korea, published for the University of Hawaii Press, and author of several research papers and book chapters on K-pop and Korean cultural industry. To mention a few, building a K community, idol stars challenging foreign fans to learn Korean tradition in Actua Coreana, from Hanok to Hanbok, traditional iconography in Korean hip-hop music videos published in Global Hip-Hop Studies Journal, and Spinning South Korea Cultural Industry for Soft Power and National Branding published in East Asian Forum, and so on. Welcome, Professor Saeji, and thank you for accepting our invitation.
Thank you for inviting me. This is very, very exciting to be speaking all the way to Costa Rica. And also I'm really thankful for Dr. López having time to give discussant remarks today. So yeah, so let me dive in. And if I'm not speaking loud enough or something, just let me know. So this project that I'm going to present for you today, I'm trying to present in a very accessible way. I don't want to be overly academic, but this is totally tied into a lot of different research projects that I have been working on for quite a few years, including looking at things like soft power and nation branding and Hallyu and presentation of Korea for the foreign eye and presentation of Korean heritage for the Korean eye as well as for the foreign eye. And the research that I'm presenting today, part of it is based on a really large survey that I did, translated into 5 different languages. And so I want to thank my translation team, Shifra Lushka, Beatrice Geithner, Zuyue Wang, and Elliot Chung for their help in preparing my survey. So let me get going. So in 2002, we have seen K-pop and Korean tradition together more than ever before. It's a clear and significant trend that K-pop artists are positioning themselves as allies with iconography and even sounds of the Korean past, as in this example that I'm showing you now of TXT performing traditional string orchestra at Gyeonggi Palace. So I know it's a little a little hard to listen to the music, but at the same time as I'm talking, but you can see here they are performing with this traditional orchestra at an actual palace. So that's the sort of thing that I've been looking at that's really fascinating. What does it mean to have this ultra modern music intersecting with the Korean past? So the motivations for an artist or a group or an agency to foreground this beautiful, fascinating, demonstratively unique elements of Korean tradition within their work are numerous. They could be responding to international criticism of K-pop as derivative, or they might feel genuinely connected to Korean traditions and enjoy or feel called to showcase them to an imagined global audience. So after colonization, the Republic of Korea, or after colonization ended, the Republic of Korea, like most former colonies, emphasized nationalism through citizenship education. And nationalism and representing the country well are actually a requirement for Korean celebrities. And celebrities even operate as official and unofficial national representatives. So it's not surprising to see them performing in real or constructed traditional settings or using tradition in the backdrop of their videos. From the fan perspective, the utilization of Korean traditional sounds, iconography, and sites within music tracks, music videos, and performances is tied to this knowledge of Korean tradition on the part of the artists and the production companies. So fans' assumptions about the presence of Korean tradition within the education system and the daily lives of Koreans brings them to conclude that K-pop artists are familiar with and knowledgeable about the traditional elements and locations being showcased in K-pop. This assumption, unfortunately, is incorrect. However, equally important, and in part driving the recent incorporation of elements of tradition in K-pop, is a trend of Korean young people becoming more conscious of and reclaiming tradition, even if that reclamation only applies to select elements and on their own terms. We can see K-pop idols perform in locations that highlight Koreanness, send greetings at the Harvest Festival and New Year, and serve as official tourism ambassadors. Collectively, this mediatization can create an impression of Koreans as living in a world that harmonizes tradition and modernity. So let me give you a little background. So what is the Korean government's relationship with Korean traditions? Well, this is very important. First of all, the Korean government is basically able to keep control of the narratives about Korean traditions, unlike pop culture. And they can dictate what happens because the government is the primary patron of the traditional arts. The government runs the museums, the government staffs the palaces, and the government also protects things like traditional performing arts. So the government has established a system for protecting Korean traditional heritage. And it basically focuses through this earlier law, the Cultural Property Protection Law, that was passed in 1962. And then it has been in some ways updated with a new law that was passed in 2016. So the traditional music and performance was, for the government, really expedient. So at the time that this law was passed in 1962, Korea was under control of a military dictator who had taken control of Korea in a coup. It was nonviolent coup, but still, he needed legitimacy. And traditional culture and the traditional performing arts were used to tie the dictatorship to pre-colonial Korea, the Korea of the time period before Japan had colonized it. And simultaneously, the traditional performers were willing to have this relationship with the government, because during the colonial era, the traditional arts had been neglected. And then after the end of the colonial era, Korea had been so poor that now with this new law and this new valorization of traditional arts, it actually gave a lot of legitimacy. There were paid performance opportunities. And eventually in the 1970s, there started being small stipends for traditional artists who are at the higher end of the training system. So right now there's this very extensive system with many different arts and artisans protecting the heritage arts. And so I'm showing that on the screen. I don't know if you can see my mouse, but I'm showing the difference between 2011, 2015, and 2021. And you can see how the total number of arts continues to go up. And we also have an increase in the number of preservation associations, but we don't have as much of an increase in these two categories, National Human Treasure and Jeonsung Gyoyuksa. And these are the two highest ranked groups of performers. So these are the people that have the most expertise. And so what's happening is, as the number of arts continues to expand, but the number of people is not keeping pace, this is primarily because the artists are aging. So these arts where even third-ranked people have committed 10, 20, or 30 years to learning and performing the arts, they don't provide a vibrant, exciting lifestyle. And there just really aren't that many youth interested in getting involved in the traditional arts these days. So at the highest rank level, where I say there's 172 national human treasures, the average age is 73.7. So these artists are quite old, and it is the highest ranked artists who are, of course, the oldest artists who get the most opportunities and get the most money out of the system and are given the most respect. And so you can see how that might be a negative reason to get involved in traditional arts if you're a young person, when you say like, wow, I would have to be in my 70s before I would be the big deal performer on the stage. And you can contrast that and this system of traditional arts where people are in training for 30, 40, 50 years. You can contrast that with the situation for something like K-pop idols, where a long period of training is 5 to 7 years, and many idols debut with less time and training than that. So despite, or maybe because of these governmental efforts to use tradition, but unfortunately, while simultaneously not really meaningfully engaging with it, what's happened is that the place of arts in Korean society today is really occupied by westernized arts. As culture has become heritage, it's not flexible enough to adapt to the changing times. And so young people have really grown far away from traditional arts. Ordinary citizens in Korea rarely attend a traditional performance. If they do, the most common reason is accidentally it turned out that way, because they don't plan this activity. They run into a performance that's in a local festival or in a palace or in a school, but they don't actually make plans to go to a traditional performance and buy the tickets in advance or something like that. In fact, most traditional performances are actually free because of the government support. But the problem is that when you pay $200 for a K-pop concert, but you pay $0 for a traditional performance, you might on some level feel like the K-pop concert is more valuable. So that's a part of the problem here. And parents continue to, in Korea, they continue to see Western music and Western performance as having more cultural capital. And so they continued to send their kids to piano and violin classes. And relatively few people in Korea are studying Korean traditional music or traditional dance. And in fact, the departments of traditional music and traditional dance have been closing in recent years because they can't get enough students. So, most Koreans, they can't even identify traditional instruments by looking at them or hearing them. So in contemporary Korea, the reality is that most people are learning about Korean traditions through the media, primarily through sageuk or historical dramas. This visual representation, such as TV programs, have the ability to actually embody memories and help people to form some sort of collective memory. But particularly for dramas about real people and events, audiences, they might expect some accuracy. But, film scholars like my friend Peter Big saying sometimes a lack of accuracy in dramas actually serves to not alienate the audience, to allow them to be immersed more fully. Because realistically speaking, most drama viewers are actually women, generally younger women, and we don't want to see traditional drama from the past that shows the real position of women in Korean society at that time. That's why we so often have something like a time traveling woman from the present, or a woman pretending to be a man, because otherwise we don't have an empowered woman, and we can't identify with these disempowered characters that would be more historically accurate. So learning about the past through media is problematic because right from the start, we're not actually prepared to see the truth of the past. So perhaps the most important reason why we're seeing tradition in K-pop right now, though, and this partially answers the question of my title, is that there's a sort of growing confidence in Korean things in Korea right now due to the success that Korea is experiencing on the world stage. BTS and Parasite and Squid Game and all of these things have given Koreans additional confidence and pride in Korea. And success for songs that incorporate Korean tradition have further emboldened other artists. So for this and other reasons, we're encountering more and more releases that are drawing on Korean spaces and Korean iconography and traditional instruments. So even though postmodern Korean youth have divorced themselves from what tradition once meant, they are taking ownership and control of it today in ways that suit their own ends. So they have more leisure time, there's a low cost of entry, there are new ways of interacting with traditional spaces, and we see young people actually engaging with these spaces in new ways. Perhaps they are using a palace as a selfie backdrop, perhaps even while wearing rented hanbok, because your average Korean person doesn't own hanbok, despite the fact that we see idols wearing new hanbok 2 times a year for greetings for the new year and for Chuseok. Young people in Korea have grown accustomed to using historic sites like public parks. In the interviews that I did, I saw that a lot of people were actually more interested in aesthetics of hanbok and the uniqueness of wearing it. And they actually appreciated modernized hanbok more than searching for authenticity. Modernized hanbok can better address the concerns of youth, like the design modifications that allow for a cinched waist or a skirt that might only extend to your knees can be more attractive for young audiences or young wearers. So the designer versions of hanbok that we see on the bodies of K-pop artists, they can combine elements of hanbok, such as necklines and fasteners, with non-hanbok elements to create something that is both flattering and unique. And it seems that only when they're doing those Chuseok or Seollal greetings do idols wear a more conventional hanbok. But if you're looking at music videos and other performative contexts, then the hanbok that are adapted have become much more common. So even the connection to hanbok can become quite tenuous. But artistic credibility is preserved through reinterpreting tradition. If the artists, the K-pop artists, if they show tradition in a very authentic way, that can actually interfere with their image as being, modern and hip and artists in their own right. So similar to the case with hanbok, other types of traditional iconography continually appear in the context of K-pop as a sort of shorthand for Korean tradition. In the music videos and performances of K-pop idols, however, contemporary Koreans may experience these less as a symbol with a highly specific contextual meaning than as a representation of the Korean past and Korean identity writ large. So through this reduction of meaning, tradition becomes something that all Koreans communally hold equal right to utilize. Seeing how such tradition is used inside of K-pop performance texts demonstrates that youth are taking what they want from tradition and adapting it. So for today's youth, the palace is a site of make-believe, a site of historical dramas that star young people just like them, contemporary women trapped in a time slip to the Joseon dynasty, or K-pop stars in a royal role. So when a palace set appears in a K-pop context, the site feels familiar from the countless saga historical dramas filmed at exactly the same site or a similar location. So it's hard to definitively attribute more soft power benefit to Korea from K-pop than image making or national branding. So as a country about which most people were kind of unaware, I mean, people really didn't know anything about Korea even a few years ago. The surge of interest in Hallyu has meant that it's through this fandom of Korean media that many fans are learning about Korea. And so it's not surprising that the evolution of relations between fans and celebrities are mapped onto templates of national identity. So, through soft power, Hallyu, that might be hard to track, but we can track economic impact of K-pop. It's been well documented that K-drama and later K-pop have become significant drivers of inbound tourism to Korea. And so in addition to selling their own artistic products and associated merchandise, K-pop idols are also advertising spokesmodels for Korea itself. Since 1998, K-pop idols have regularly appeared in advertisements enticing viewers to visit Korea. And in addition, the government drafts them to appear at diplomatic events, even going so far in 2021 as appointing BTS special presidential envoy for future generations and cultures. So because K-pop idols are so often drafted to serve these commercial and national interests, when we see a K-pop performance inside a palace or K-pop music videos shot on a traditional filming set, it risks there's a risk of this being seen as an extension of the advertising canvas. Today, it's clearer than ever that audiences may actively seek out and engage intellectually with cultural differences in their media content. To go on a little bit of a tangent here, when Hallyu first started to take off and scholars first started to do research on it, back in 2000 and 2005, when the first papers about Hallyu started to come out, then at that time, a lot of scholars were saying people like Hallyu products in other countries in Asia because Korea is culturally proximate to those cultures. So like, oh, our culture is similar to the culture in Japan or similar to the culture in Southeast Asia. We have similar values. We all, care about our elders, and we all, we don't want to see dramas with lots of, sex. We want to see love stories, and there was all these arguments about how it's not Korean culture. It's not the uniqueness of Korea. In fact, there were a lot of scholars who were talking about the way that K-pop, for example, sounds similar to international pop music, and they were saying like, oh, this is hybrid, but the popularity is based on it being similar to international stuff, not based on it being uniquely Korean. And so for a long time, people didn't actually think that highlighting Koreanness in dramas or highlighting Koreanness in K-pop was the way to be a success. Like, they actually thought we should shoot all of our music videos on kind of an anonymous set. And you can see almost no use of traditional iconography in K-pop or use of traditional sounds in K-pop until about 2016. And that's like when we're starting to have this shift where we're seeing the whole world is getting interested in Hallyu and interested in Korean culture now. And Korean culture producers were like, okay, we're going to foreground Koreanness. We're going to highlight the uniqueness of our country. And so now we see the situation where Korean culture and Korean language are being consumed positively. I mean, you students in Costa Rica who are actually studying about Korea and studying about East Asia and learning the Korean language, that so much of this growth in Korean studies internationally is tied to Hallyu, and that Korean language and Korean culture become pull factors instead of obstacles for Korean pop music, for example. So for so long, I know that most of you in the audience are probably younger. For so long, big artists, especially if they're working for larger companies like SM Entertainment or JYP or YG, that they would produce some of their hit singles in Mandarin Chinese and in Japanese as well. And that was considered like normal. We have to offer it in these other languages. Otherwise, they won't be interested in our stuff. We have to reduce the Koreanness, even to the extent of translating the songs. And when we see early artists trying to take off in English-speaking international markets, then of course they were releasing songs entirely in English, which then we see in the case of like Gangnam Style in 2012, or BTS taking off from 2016, but more from 2018. We can see like actually the big key moments in the takeoff of K-pop internationally have been while embracing Koreanness and while foregrounding Koreanness. So these elements that are distinctly Korean have actually become an asset to Korean artists, an asset that's not available to international artists. So it's a gigantic shift, really. This shift towards using Korean tradition, in some ways we could think of it as like a mark of maturation of this industry. you know, this industry that once wanted to replicate Western formats. You know, you've all heard about, you know, K-pop artists being accused of cultural appropriation, or in an earlier era, being accused of musical plagiarism was quite common. And it was because Korean artists at that time period, they thought the way to become successful is to mimic what is internationally successful. But even though, like, of course, any scholar of media can easily point out the ways that K-pop is in fact different, even when there's no Korean symbols in the video, even when there's no icons of Korea, even when there's no traditional musical instruments in the video. Of course, it's still unique. Of course, it still has elements that are different than, you know, other media industries in other countries. But if you dress up K-pop with added cultural content, you know, distinctive visuals, sounds of traditional instruments in this strategic way to assert difference, then this use of, you know, local expression provides insulation from things like charges of cultural appropriation. So on the screen right now, I have, you can see Jay Park. So he released this DNA remix along with a lot of his label's artists. And the first video that came out, people were immediately like, cultural appropriation, and it was criticized really heavily, and they took it down immediately, and then they re-uploaded it. I think it was like about 2 months later, and when they re-uploaded it, instead of the artists you know, having a lot of, you know, gold chains and, you know, dreadlocks and stuff like that. Instead of that, when they re-uploaded it, we see Jay here wearing a hanbok jogori and even putting the flag over himself as a sort of, you know, like a blanket or a shawl. And so we can see how in the contemporary era, embracing Koreanness and using it as sort of a shield from these accusations of things like cultural appropriation has become a unique strategy of sorts. So it is interesting, though, like what sorts of aspects of tradition appear in the backdrop for K-pop. So in recent years, it seems like there's been a sort of visual shortcut that has been created for representing Korean tradition. Like visual shortcut, like think about how like the Eiffel Tower represents Paris. So in the same way, Korean tradition is shown through things like architecture, hanbok, large buk barrel drums, the Ilwol Obongdo paintings, the Sangmo ribbon hat dance, two-person lions, the Danchung beam paintings. You can see some of the beam paintings up here, and fans. And many of these items, they might not have any connection to the actual stories in the music videos, but they're visually arresting. So these traditional elements, they're not appearing in K-pop in some sort of authentic, you know, manner. Again, the artists are asserting their individuality and their ability to make tradition serve artistic goals, and they can do that by wearing, you know, jeans, but hanging some traditional ornament like a norige from their belt, which is something that Jay Park again has done. So these visual references to Korean tradition, they remain much more common than oral ones. Oral ones as in, you know, the ones we can hear, principally because the modes and the scales and the rhythmic patterns that distinguish Korean tradition don't match easily with popular music. They're not well known to the average songwriter, many of whom are international specialists. So for those of you who don't know, like a lot of K-pop songs are actually written by teams that are brought in from other countries, and the music part. And so these international teams in songwriting camps, they don't have any knowledge or understanding or exposure to Korean traditional music. So of course it would be uncommon if they were incorporating tradition. So one of the more frustrating aspects for me as a scholar has been that even though we're seeing more and more Korean tradition inside of these K-pop contexts, at the same time, it doesn't seem very effective at driving audience understanding. So I don't see audiences simultaneously learning more about Korean tradition. It's very surface level. They learn to identify something and they can say, oh, that is, Sangmo ribbon dance, but that's the depth. It's just being able to identify it. So like K-pop doesn't exist to educate audiences, but it is creating curiosity in people. And I wish that curiosity could be better capitalized upon. Management companies, I would like to see them do more things like identifying important sources of inspiration in press releases, or even listing instruments and naming the traditional artists who are performing them in video and song credits, because you would be surprised how often traditional instruments that foreign audiences say, oh, here's a traditional instrument, but there is no traditional instrument being used in that song. And because there isn't a full disclosure about all of the musical elements, then it's understandable that somebody could have that imagination. And I'll show you an example of that in a second. But the other thing is they don't identify who the traditional artists are that they work with. In very few cases they do. And I definitely want to hold up, Ravi from VIX and One Us and Hwasa from Mamamoo. Those are examples of 3 K-pop artists who have publicly named and really helped elevate the career of some traditional artists that they've worked with. But it's not normal for the K-pop artists to do that. Most of the time, the traditional artists are unnamed and basically faceless. So anyway, the way that the industry uses intertextuality to drive fan engagement has been something that has often been used without explanation, and not including explanations is sort of part of the tradition of K-pop, where there's a process of discovery, where K-pop fans enjoy working out the meaning, working out what's going on in a video as part of engagement with a newly released track. But intertextuality through adding visual elements redolent of a historical drama, it may create more audience engagement precisely because the general audience has less familiarity with them than Alice in Wonderland. But it would be nice if there was clearer education going on to the K-pop fans. So when I did my survey, respondents overwhelmingly showed that they love the use of traditional elements in K-pop. It doesn't hurt the attractiveness of a song. It can be neutral, but for most people, it actually improves the music. Collaborating with a pansori choir and a taepyeongso player like Ravi did in Bum actually provides something that stands out for listeners. But here's the example that I wanted to show you guys, where there are also misunderstandings, and these misunderstandings aren't cleared up. Like an example is Dreamcatcher has this song called Piri, and I'm just going to play you this one little clip at 1:12, just a second. What? I thought I was playing at 1:12, but apparently not. Just a second. So I'm sure you guys could hear this sort of like whistle sound here. And because the song is called Piri, which is the name of a reed instrument, a vertical reed instrument, a little bit similar to an oboe in sound, it is actually a computer modulated whistle, which was sampled from a Western pop song. But because that whistle comes at the same time as the lyric says, blow the piri, there are actually a lot of international audiences that mistake this as being the sound of the piri. And so that's an example of like how K-pop could do a much better job by either, if you're going to call your song piri, actually use a piri in it, or by explaining to the audience, oh, we didn't mean to confuse you. We actually didn't use a piri in this song. So although we have had some collaborative efforts that have been really successful in recent years, including groups like Korea and Inalchi, a lot of these have been initiated really far from the K-pop world. Moving forward, if K-pop artists more clearly explain these traditional instruments and credit collaborators, and if traditional artists were more quickly reactive to events in K-pop, and traditional artists could then, explain to international audiences, it would really benefit fans who are interested in learning more, and it could help foster a sustained interest in Korean traditions. So in conclusion, as in all other areas of their public presentation, K-pop idols must thread a very sensitive line. So they carefully balance different positions of the interest group that consumes their music, the fans, and the interest group that demands they perform nationalism, Korean citizens, and the interest group that wants their popularity to serve the nation, the Korean government. So at least for now, it seems that all three of these interest groups respond positively to incorporating tradition into music videos, performance locations, and the music itself. Therefore, it is likely that this trend will continue. However, the highly engaged fandom may not continue to be satisfied with surface level and relatively random incorporation of tradition. The days when Sangmo dancers could be part of a video with no explanation at all may have passed. As in One Us's brand new intro window, the 6 members of the group cede center space to Gukakin Che Ye-rim, who is credited as the featured artist for the track. Che, like members of the group, is young. With One Us, Che is demonstrating how the youth are remaking and reclaiming tradition. In 2022, Pansori-esque vocals can open the track of a K-pop album. And let's just listen to just the opening of this.
죽어도 죽지 못하는 여선요괴라. 하루가 국 1년 가고 100년 가고 1000년 가도 달퍼라 내 마음 오늘도 찾아있네 저고리 뜨는 찾으랴.
Yeah, yeah, 내 가슴에 아름다움에 갇힌 길을 잃어버린 똑같이 마치.
All right, so with that, I will conclude.
Thank you so much, Professor. Thank you for sharing with us your paper. And there's a lot of points that we can deep. For me, I have a lot of questions, but before that, I will introduce Dr. Nayelli, and then we have time to deepen some points that are really interesting. For me, for example, next year we will host a traditional concert here in the University of Costa Rica, a Korean traditional concert, Pansori, actually. And so there's a really strong point that how we can think about tradition as also how can we use tradition think about it as a process of adapting and transforming process that not have to be authentic, because also the idea of authenticity we can question it about, but after we can deepen this point. And first I want to introduce Nayelli, Dr. Nayelli López Rocha, graduated in social anthropology from the Autonomous Metropolitan University, Iztapalapa campus, and master in Asian and Africa with a specialty in Korean from the Colegio de Mexico. She was a Republic of Korea government scholarship holder for doctoral studies at Hanyang University, Seoul. In 2011, she graduated as the first Latin American holding a PhD in Korean studies. In Korea, she taught at Hansei University, Chung-An University, and Seoul National University. Her research lines are focused on contemporary Korean culture and society, the Korean way value, Korean pop culture, contemporary Korean women and their image in Latin America, and Korean cultural consumption by young Mexicans, among others. She is currently part of the University Program for Studies on Asia and Africa of the Humanities Coordination of the National Autonomous University of Mexico, where she develops as a researcher. Welcome, Nayelli, and thank you for accepting our invitation.
Thank you very much, Dr. Costantini, and thank you also, Dr. Cedar, for letting me comment this interesting presentation. First of all, I want to extend my congratulations to you, because I understand the importance of the reflection toward these topics. First of all, as Dr. Costantini said, because I focus a lot of my research in the way that young people is consuming these Korean cultural products. And when I'm in class, always it's very difficult to bring them out for these images they got from those products like are in everywhere, like internet or now the platforms, or in the performances they do every weekend in the open spaces in the parks in Mexico, and they exchange information about all the groups and all Korean products. And it's very difficult to bring them out from those ideas that are in some way wrong about what Korea is or what Korean culture is. And this is difficult just to explain them that Korean culture in contemporary society is not that image. So I think in traditional is even more difficult to make them understand what Korea is. And I'm very happy to see this video you put at the last about Pansori, because sometimes I just say to them, like, I just can't imagine you listening Pansori every day in the morning, or like dancing with Pansori music when you are with all your friends. together talking about K-pop groups, etc., because it's a very, very different what Korean tradition is from what they are projecting. So I want to express my happiness to hear and to be here, like commenting your presentation. And I would like to, first of all, to put these big elements in the front line that are just essential to understand how this Korean entertainment industry has been able to float all the world entertainment industry. So first of all, this ability to be the soft power that they can hold, the nation bonding that Korean government has put together with this entertainment industry, and also the capacity of Korean private industries, in this case the entertainment industries, to see what it's the fashion or the consuming elements that are important in the world. For me, it's very interesting to see how this, for me, standardization of Korean pop culture has been able to get inside the global market and to face big industries as States industry or Europe, I don't know, Britain industry, for example, that it used to seem to be the predominant culture, pop culture in the world. And it seemed to the world just consuming that sort of products. So suddenly the Korean industry became important and is starting to enter into this global market, but in a very, very strong way. Like from the Latin American point of view, it's very interesting because Mexico for so many years was the predominant Spanish-speaking industry in terms of telenovela or music, but it was it was strong, but it was not globally represented as the Korea is now. So for me, the big question is how they did it. And the answer I have found is that the private industries in Korea were able to work with the government. So it's very important to understand these two parts to see the power that they have been able to condense. I'm sorry for my English, but I have a long time without speaking in English, so sometimes I feel a little bit uneasy to express. But saying this, I want to take also this part where you emphasize the role of cultural heritage administration of Korean government and how they have been able to put some specific elements as representatives of Korean tradition. For me, this is also very important because when I was in Korea back to 2011 doing or writing my dissertation, I was telling my professor that it seemed that Hallyu become to reconstruct or rebuild the Korean identity, an identity that was passing from a Korean in construction to a modern country, and that they want to show the world another image of what Korea is. And this is very important because then we follow in this point where you say, which sort of traditional elements are they rescuing from their tradition to show to the world? Why they feel they should choose some specific elements and how they represent it as part of their culture, but not others. Like what make them select the traditional culture to be representative or not in the contemporary world. So what it comes to me is that those are elements that are easy to communicate to the world. easy to communicate to the world because the word is used to associate Asian or the Asianness with some elements that have been reproduced by other cultures as Chinese culture or Japanese culture. And these elements have already a sort of, how do you say, they have already in the mind of the people, like how they experience Asia through specific elements. So at the end is the way to make easy the transfer of information and to make it easier this communication with the world. They can also easier be consumed by the world. And this is the final target of this industry, the consumption. They, they are part of the strategy to make popular Korea, and they are part of the strategy to provoke in the young people, mainly in the young people, the interest about Korea. But the target of the industry and the country is to make money finally, is to make big this enterprise. So we maybe have to also to question the process in which the world has planned the way to become economically strong, or the way we are reproducing to consume, just the consume for consume, not without thinking, not without questioning. So for me, this is interesting because as you mentioned at the end, some elements like pansori are being integrated, and I think, at some point the Korean pop groups or Korean pop needs to rescue some specific elements as they can relate with Korea tradition, because in the global market, as they need to be competitive to sell and to be present in the taste of the audiences, they need to put some special ingredient that make them be different from the other. And this is part also of the consume process. That maybe the real traditional is not that successful, or is not that attractive as this process, or especially selected elements that are represented as traditional to be consumed for the world. Because besides everything should be like some sort of standardized to be easy to consume to all the societies that are now consuming all the Korean entertainments. So in some way, I think, like, there is the hybrid process, for example, as you say, in the handbook, or in the other elements that are put in some way mixed with Occident, or Occident elements, or that are more easy to process for the consumers. But at the end, even those, for example, the handbook has another representation, is associated with Korea. And this is the part that will label the product as Korean, right? Because also the language, sometimes is very mixed already with English, or we see that if they are focused in the Latin American market, they put some words in Spanish, and sometimes even they don't pronounce it correctly, but they put it because the goal, the target is to communicate, to make some sort of contact with the recipient societies. But so you were saying very, very important thing, like, although they put these traditional Korean elements, the audiences or the consumers do not learn, or they do not show a real interest for this part of the Korean tradition. So I think this is the very big question of all the process of the Korean culture globalization, because at the end, and this also happened in Mexico, like the Korean government promote this industry, but at the same time they promote to put some Sejong institute to, if they can make the young people to be interested in Korean, they have the place where to go to learn Korean, or they put these cultural centers for them to go and to experience Korean culture, right? They have reduced the Korean culture to pop culture, when in reality we know that it's much more than that. But the students or the young people, they get engaged with pop, and they get engaged with Korean or with Korean music, or the interest on the country in general. But when they start experience the real Korea, the real history, they get very disappointed, because they don't find relation with what they are hearing or they are receiving from the products and the reality. So when we have been working about this brand, I don't have the word in English, marca país, or brand, like country, the brand of country as Korea. We always say that they should be very strict to give people what they are selling, because they can promote the tourism to Korea, or they can promote the interest to learn Korean, or they can promote the consuming what they are promoting about Korea. But if the person who come very interested in learn about Korea through the tourists, or they come to the country, they don't see what they expect, they get disappointed. So there should be a relation. Yeah, I understand. One is the ideal image they want to project about Korea, but that's not what they will find in the country when they come to make tourists in Korea. Maybe they can find the palace and they can take the picture there, but further than that, there is no interest in go deeply in the knowledge of Korea. So for me, the question is what they really want, or what they are really interested in promote the country, or really promote the Korean studies, a real Korean studies, or they just want promotion, they just want to improve the market and the consumption of this very strong industry that they definitively have done. So you say they should capitalize better these traditional elements in different audiences, but question is this the important thing for those agencies that are making all the production back for these groups, or they are using it only as elements to get some visual attraction and the popularity? I will stop here, and I again thank you very much for your presentation.
Thank you so much, Dr. Lopez. And we are receiving a lot of questions, but before that, I let Professor Saeji to answer to your questions and our comments to your comments, please.
Oh, Dr. Lopez, thank you so much for that. I feel like we really understand each other, and we have very similar concerns about what's going on in Korea. Actually, you know, I work in Korea now, and I teach primarily international exchange students, and I can see in them this process of disappointment, you know, that Korea might not be what they had expected. And it's not all students. There are many students who come to Korea who who, because they're studying something about Korea, that they have a deeper understanding. But there are among the visitors and the exchange students and even the people who come to work in Korea or marriage migrants, there are people who come and realize that Korea is quite different than the way it is mediatized. And so there are a lot of contradictions. You know, there are traditional or there are pop artists that are engaging with tradition, and you can tell that they really care about it, and they have some sort of deep knowledge, and they're really exploring it, and they're sharing this with the international audience. And on the other hand, we have people that it's kind of like they're using it as some exotic spice that they're sprinkling across the K-pop to make it visually stand out, to attract an audience that might want K-pop to be even more different, even more separated from their own national reality. And so we have tremendous difference. And also in government officials who may be driving some of these efforts to promote Korea or to accumulate soft power. We have people in different agencies or different politically appointed people who may only be in power for 5 years or even less, who come in with very different visions. And so we can have one agency that's showing one vision and another agency showing a completely different vision. And then even within the same, group, we can see that they're trying to kind of be all things to all people. So some of my research right now, I'm looking at advertisements created by the Korea Tourism Organization and the way that they're marketing Korea. And you can see the explicit creation of Korea as a visitable space, and that they want to commoditize an experience of Korea that is going to attract, sometimes they're aiming more for a domestic audience, and sometimes they're aiming for an international audience, because domestic tourism is also a thing. A lot of people just live in the large cities, and how can we get them to leave the large cities and spend money in smaller communities that desperately need, the income? And so we can see that there'll be like a certain series of tourism promotions that are really commoditizing Korea in a certain way that may be an idealization of, rural life. And then at the same time, the same industry or the same agency is putting out another series of advertisements that seem to be aimed at a very unrealistic idea of Korea as a K-pop filled space. You can come to Korea and you can have an experience of, going to a recording studio and, pretending to record your own K-pop track. It's like, okay. I mean, that's great. And I'm happy for anybody to come to Korea and have a great time. And I just, I think this is such an amazing country, and there's so many fun things going on here. But I do see the ways that Korea is being marketed and sold and commoditized and created as a visitable space that often create images that are diametrically opposed to each other, that they don't even seem like they belong in the same country. And in fact, I wonder if those images are possible. And some are possible. Like there's a very cute BTS Life in Seoul advertisement, and it's so possible. Everything they do, they go next to the Hangang and, eat some food, and they take a walk, and everything that they're doing in the video is something that any tourist to Korea could also do. And you could feel like, I'm living the life of young people in Seoul. But then there are other videos that really are showing an idealized rural life where you have community and you know all your neighbors and you guys can just work in the fields together, and then at the end of the day you can come together and have some sort of like potluck dinner and everybody's got pajan and makgeolli. And I mean, I love pajan and makgeolli, and like, you know, farming fields can be quite you know, beautiful to look at, but at the same time it's like, who's going to experience that? Because we don't have community. We can't just go to a rural place and suddenly find a bunch of old people with a cute dog to feed us pajan and makgeolli. Like, that's never going to happen. And so if you come to Korea with that vision, you know, how do we transform that vision of a visitable space into an actual experience? I think that's very hard. And so much of the, you know, these pop culture things that are floating around out there, they similarly are creating a vision of a place that you can never visit. And I mean, I think it's absolutely lovely to imagine people coming to Korea and going to, you know, a bus stop that BTS, you know, took a photo at, and recreating that photo. And I think that that's lovely, but I wonder, do they go home feeling satisfied with just visiting a bus stop? Because while they were going to that bus stop, they may have experienced things that I have experienced in Korea, and Dr. Lopez, maybe you've experienced too, where you feel othered and maybe you have difficulty, even though you can speak in Korean, where people look at your foreign face and don't want to understand the words that are coming out of your mouth. Or, you know, many of the international visitors who may have dietary restrictions, where Korea, where there's hidden seafood and everything, and pork is the most common type of meat, that those people who may come from a culture that does not eat pork, or may have like a seafood allergy, that they could have so many difficulties just being able to communicate, like you know. Anyway, I'm just going off on tangents here. I do want everybody to come to Korea and have a wonderful time in Korea. I do like that young people in Korea are engaging with their traditions, even if they sometimes do it in a shallow way. I do like that K-pop is putting a focus on some of these traditions. I just really worry about the connection between what people are seeing on a screen and what happens when they come. I'm sorry to be so disjointed.
Thank you so much. We have a lot of questions, so I'm gonna pick some of them, not all of them, because we don't have time to answer all of them. So let me see. For example, would you consider that the visual use of aesthetics, the use of these particular symbols like handbook, fans, etc., is more a product of the public demands to see more cultural symbols, or actual interest on introducing the culture to others?
I would say that it is definitely a mixture. For some, we have many different actors here, right? So we have entertainment agencies that may be hoping to have a closer relationship with the government and maybe trying to help promote Korea with a big K to the world. So we have that sort of like entertainment CEO who may be trying to butter up the government. And we have individual artists who may be attracted to tradition or may enjoy things about tradition. We have music video directors who may just be looking for a good backdrop or a unique concept. And we also right now have, as this has become a larger and larger trend, we have a sort of pressure to demonstrate that you love Korea, that you're a real good nationalistic Korean by also creating one of these. So as more and more artists create this sort of product, at least one video that shows Korean tradition, then it puts pressure on the rest of the artists to also be valorizing Korean traditional things. And so it's very complicated to answer that, because I think that honestly, each individual instance could be coming from a different origin story, whether that's a visual art director or there are concepts, like specific artists that have a comeback with a concept, and the concept is linked to, for example, a Chinese folktale, and then the song is also linked to it, and then the visuals are also linked to it. But we have other videos where the traditional elements are just something like Blackpink wearing some hanbok in a video. There's nothing about tradition in the video, but they appear in hanbok. So, you know, that we could say that's probably just a gesture at showing, hi, we're Korean and Korean things are cool and beautiful, as opposed to being part of the story. So again, I'm not sure I answered that question fully.
I think so. Sorry, but we don't have time to deepen all the topics, because we really are receiving a lot of questions. So we go with another one. To what extent does the Korean government have power over the projection of the Hallyu movement on the international scene, and how could this affect the future of Korean soft power?
Actually, the Korean government doesn't have much of any control over the way that Hallyu is presented. The problem with soft power for governments is, like, governments want soft power, but soft power is dependent on something being popular. And who decides it's popular is the audience, not the government. So like, the government definitely tries to reward the things that they like, the things that they see that they like. And so we see the government, when they decide which stars they're going to use as tourism ambassadors and stuff like that, we can see them rewarding certain things. Which stars they work with, and stuff like that. But at this point, the K-pop industry is taking very little money directly from the government. It's more that the government is helping to promote the industry as a whole by creating regulations and tax, and tariff agreements that help these cultural products to be exported easily, that help the goals of these entertainment agencies. And so the government has to create infrastructure, create an environment that helps basically all agencies equally, other than choosing, somebody who can be like BTS, as a national ambassador, or choosing somebody to be a tourism ambassador. The government's not really giving money directly. And the interesting thing is, even when we have an artist who makes a tourism song for a tourism video, the copyright is held by the artist and the royalties continue to go to the artist, even though the video is created and the money for filming and everything comes from the government. Like, here, please make this video to promote Korea. But the copyright is the artist, and they actually can sell that song and make money from it, which is interesting. So it can be really beneficial to the artists to work with the government in that sort of way. But other than that, they don't really work that directly. And the Korean government, by continuing to work with artists in the hope of gaining soft power, the Korean government is also vulnerable to K-pop artists if they do something wrong, if they create a bad image for Korea. The government is vulnerable to that as well. So if you become too closely tied to a K-pop group, we can use the example of Big Bang. Big Bang and individual members of Big Bang were promoting Korea and national representatives. And then Seungni had this huge scandal back in 2018, 2019, one of the members of Big Bang. And so that kind of scandal, then the government is suddenly like, ooh, we're not connected to Big Bang. So they're suddenly trying to create a barrier of, we have nothing to do with that, that group. We have nothing to do with what they did. And you can really see the government stepping back from YG Entertainment, in that moment. And YG Entertainment and Seungni and other people caught up in that whole scandal, not having, the support from the government, because the government didn't want to be tied to them at all at that moment. And so that is the problem with soft power, is if you're tied to an artist and then the artist acts in a way that can, change the image of Korea internationally, because fans all around the world knew about Burning Sun.
Really interesting. I'm gonna choose other two questions, and I'm sorry for all of the other questions. I cannot choose because we don't have time. So let me see. Are there any examples outside of the mainstream media that show collaboration between traditional performers and musicians working in the popular music industry, for example, in trot music?
So there are great examples for artists with traditional training who then work with more popular artists. So we have a ton of examples of that, where the knowledge of tradition is very strong within a traditional artist, and then they themselves start making more popular type music that's aimed at a more general audience and not a traditional music audience. So we have a lot of groups like that right now that are doing really, really fascinating stuff. And you might call it fusion traditional, like reinventing Korean traditions, like that kind of thing. So we do have a lot of groups that are doing that. The only groups that do it really well are the ones that have the traditional background, because you can move from traditional towards pop, because you understand pop, because you live in a contemporary world where you're exposed to pop all the time. But if you live in a pop world and you've never studied anything about tradition, it can be much harder to move in the opposite direction, because they don't understand the instruments, their limitations, the ways that the scales are different, things like that. And so in the case of trot, we can see excellent examples like Song Ga-in, who won the first of the big trot competition shows, Miss Trot, that created the current trot boom. Song Ga-in has a background in pansori, and then now she's doing trot. But there's actually quite a lot of people in trot who have a background in pansori, but when they're doing trot, they're actually doing trot. They're not doing pansori anymore. So it's not quite the same thing, because they're not showcasing tradition in trot in general. But there are some trot artists that do the same thing that I was talking about with K-pop, where they just use visuals and stuff like that. It's tons of fun. Sorry, I should answer faster than it. We can do more questions.
Don't worry. Actually, I was thinking about there's a lot of examples in China of rock and metal bands that use traditional instrument with transforming the traditional instrument and adapting in the rock and metal. I don't know if in Korea there's the same. I know more about China, not so much about Korea. I don't know if in Korea it's the same. The use of komungo in metal or in rock bands. This happened.
It's the same thing that I was just saying, where if they have the traditional background, then they can move that way. So there's an example like the group Jambenai, which is very much like a kind of metal hard rock group with gomungo. So, yeah.
Really, thank you. Last question. I don't want to keep you busy. When is commodification positive, and when can we draw the line for it start causing problematic behavior for the Koreans and people getting into the culture?
Well, I guess the question I want to ask is, who is the commodification benefiting? And the big problem that I'm seeing from my research perspective is the commodification is benefiting people other than traditional artists. So we have all of these new examples of tradition kind of coming into a greater spotlight. But if you think, for example, of all of the people who come and rent hanbok and walk around, you know, the palaces in Seoul, but almost all of those hanbok are made in China. So they're not, and I'm not even talking about how authentic the, you know, the hanbok is. Like, if people want to wear a hanbok that isn't, you know, makes them look the way they want to look, that's fine. It's dress up, it's play, enjoy your playing. I'm not judging wearing a non-traditional hanbok, but what I'm saying is who is benefiting from that commodification? If all of the you know, the hanbok are just being made in China, then is a Korean person benefiting other than the shopkeeper who's renting that hanbok to you? And, you know, we have hanbok designers in Korea, and we have, you know, artisans and seamstresses and all of that kind of stuff. And are they making anything out of this spotlight on hanbok in the present era? And, you know, the same with the traditional music. Like, it's wonderful that people are interested in it when they see it in the case of K-pop, but are they going to actually, is that going to cross over into downloading or buying an actual CD from a traditional artist, not somebody who is, I mean, there are a lot of cases that are really bothering me at the moment where I see they only want the mask as a symbol of traditional Korea, but they don't want the story associated with that mask. And that story comes from one small town in Korea. And so there's a costume that goes together with that mask, and there's a story, and there's motions, and there might be dialogue and jokes or maybe songs that character does, but they only want the mask. And so who is that benefiting? Again, the mask is probably going to be created in China, and, you know, it's not even benefiting a Korean artisan, and the actual dancer, the actual performer from some heritage art, you never even heard their story. You have no idea what their story is. So it's like, you feel like, oh, I like Korean tradition and I like Korean masks, and I want to bring this home and I'm going to put it on my wall. But did that commodification, and, you know, the government is using mask imagery and, you know, promoting different towns and promoting Korea and in tourism advertisements. Is that promotion of mask as a commodity that represents Korean tradition, is it giving any money at all to a mask maker or a traditional performer of Korean mass dance dramas? And so that's the problem. If it's doing that, if it's giving money to a traditional mask maker, to a traditional mass dance drama performance group, then I'm all for it, because I want those people to make money. They're having a hard time. They're having a hard time recruiting new people to get involved in these traditional arts because you can't make any money. So if it's commodification that ends up going back to help the actual artisans in Korea, then I'm going to say yay. But if it's commodification that lets you take home a piece of Korea and it's actually made in China, then I guess I feel real disappointed with that.
Yeah, totally. I let Dr. Lopez to have the final comment, and we have to end because we already 1 hour and a half. Dr. Lopez, please.
Thank you very much. Well, I just, I don't know how subjective I will look like now, but I completely agree with Dr. Cedar, because that's a problem, I think, not only in Korea, in all the world, that these persons who have reproduced from ancient times to the contemporary times, these traditions or these cultural heritages are being just move away from those big companies who are just interested in make money. This process of appropriation of traditions are just trafficking all around the world, and I think we should be very critical on these processes, because they are just taking away or taking back or just stealing the cultural property that it's also intellectual property, because culture and arts are intellectual property. And I think Korea should be very, very aware of these processes, because finally, yes, what they are, as Dr. Cedar say, is very difficult to get or to catch or to recruit new artisans or young people who is interested in this, because they see that there is no retribution from the work or the creations they do. So how it will end, right? Like, yeah, it will be very popular, or it will make a lot of money, but it will stay in Korea, or they will stop reproducing that, because of course the reproduction of these elements, traditional elements, come from identity, from love, from origin, from the sense of belonging to somewhere. So if they are not smart to see that this can be a process of destruction of these elements that now give them identity, so I just also will be very disappointed, because then all the beauty of Korean culture, what it really makes you feel that Korea is a wonderful country, will be erased. So they should be very, very attentive to these processes, and try to stop and to think if just that making the money is the important part of all this theater that Hallyu and pop music have done in the world. So thank you very much, and again, I'm very pleased to be here.
Thank you so much, both of you, for sharing with us your research and your comments and ideas. Before leaving you, I remind you that the last conference of these cycles will be on December 8th by Professor Betsabe Hoffman, and will be co-organized together with the Programa de Posgrado de Estudios de la Mujer. Thank you so much, and have a nice evening or morning. Bye.